Hey guys, we are back updating the Power Rankings for Survivor UK following week 5, the first 2 episodes of the merge. And I thought this was a pretty interesting merge round where obviously we got a lot of shifting dynamics here. And we got 2 pretty interesting votes here to get into, but we'll get more into that in a moment. But there are 11 players to talk about, and unless I'm wasting any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 11, we have the first boot from this week, and here we have Lee, who is obviously the merge boot of the season. And I feel like this was largely expected, where I feel like Lee had been set up for a downfall now for several weeks, and it just made sense for him to go out here, being like this relatively big character going out at the first opportunity here. And he obviously gets from pretty damning content here about how he's not worried about the merge, that he's sure that real people will prosper and that he's aligned with those people. And obviously he does figure out later on that he's the target there, but really I feel like there wasn't much setup for him to stay here. I feel like it was pretty clear he was going out here both before this episode and even within this episode. And I feel like in terms of Lee as a merge boot, he's obviously a very questionable player. He never actually votes correctly across the season here, which I find pretty funny. Though at the same time, he did at least have a backing coming into this merge round where he obviously had 3 other people voting to keep him, which I think is a minor pro, plus the fact that he did at least survive 3 tribals. But again, he never actually votes correctly. He's someone that was very gung-ho about working with the men moving forward. He obviously was very focused on challenges across the season. In general, I feel like as a merge boot, he's probably not going to be super high on my ranking, but obviously he is now out of the game, which is why he is here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have the other boot from this week, and here we have Ashley, who is another pretty big character across the season, and someone that got a pretty big edit over the course of the week here. Where obviously their relationship with Christopher is highlighted here, and obviously they were shown to at least be in the driver's seat during this initial Lee round where she was the main one gunning for Lee, until Lee ends up blowing up her game at the tribal where he goes out, which makes Ashley and Christopher pretty big targets there. And obviously she does get kind of unlucky that Christopher is the one who has the idol there, where they obviously split the votes. Christopher plays the idol on himself, and through that she ends up being sent out here, being only the second boot after the merge. And again, I feel like from a pure game perspective, I feel like Ashley was definitely not the best player in the world. I mean, she was obviously targeted quite a bit, where there were plenty of opportunities where she could have gone out there, which I think is a bit questionable. So realistically, I don't know how well she would have done moving forward. But again, she at least had a very solid ally in Christopher. And plus, she got pretty solid content during bits of the pre-merge here. But again, I felt like she was just too big of a target by that point in the game. And again, she is now out of the game, which is why she is here at number 10. And with that, there are 9 players left in the game to talk about. And as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win based off their edit and current game position. But number 9, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on is Leilani. And I'm a bit disappointed Leilani has fallen this low, as obviously in previous weeks I'd had her a bit higher. However, I feel like at this point, like, her edit's not looking great. She probably has the quietest edit out of anyone from this week, where she doesn't get any confessionals in the merge episode, which I find particularly bad. And her only confessional across this week comes in episode 10, the episode after the merge, where she talked about how everyone's true colors are showing now, which is something, I guess. But I feel like this quiet merge episode wasn't great. And plus, I feel like from a pure game standpoint, I feel like she's probably not in the best spot moving forward, where despite her technically having connections with both tribes, the fact that this isn't highlighted more is another knock against her. And I feel like she's someone that hasn't really been in the driver's seat for a lot of the game, which I find not particularly great, which is why she's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have another player that has been mostly quiet in the edit up to this point, and here we have Hannah. And obviously Hannah is another one who has consistently been pretty quiet in the edit, and again, this week was not great for her, where she only gets a confessional in the merge episode talking about how Lee's been loyal to her, only for her to lose Lee in a spot where she is one of the people to vote alongside him, which is pretty bad on its own, the fact that she got that content there. And even outside that, I feel like she's another one that's not really being propped up as a major character across the season, someone that's probably not going to be in a solid spot moving forward. The reason I have her above Leilani is that I feel like she probably has more win equity at this point compared to Leilani, But I feel like with how muted she's been in the edit, I just don't see how she's going to win the game from this point, which is why she's here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and this was actually a pretty big drop from last week, as I previously had this person quite a bit higher on the list, but I feel like this was a particularly bad week for them, and here we have Christopher. And again, this was bad on Christopher's end, mainly from a game standpoint, but even from an edit standpoint, I felt like he was getting undermined at points, particularly in the round where he talks about how he plans to use his idol on Ashley if it came down to it, only for him to be forced to use it on himself in a situation where he would have gone home without it. Now, obviously, I don't fault him from a game standpoint for using the idol on himself, but the fact that that made the edit, the fact that he said that he would have used the idol on Ashley for only for him to not do so, is a pretty big knock against his edit here. But obviously, the main reason he's this low is, again, from a game standpoint, he's obviously on the bottom now, where he immediately gets flipped on at the first round after the merge here, where him and Ashley are pegged off as this duo, and he's forced to use the idol on himself after the rest of the tribe splits the votes on them. And obviously, he's now kind of a big threat, though at the same time, like, I could see him skating on by. I don't think this episode was necessarily a death sentence for him, and I could see a world where he does recover in the future. But again, I can't ignore how bad of a week this was for him, both from an edit standpoint, but also from a game standpoint especially. So it's for all those reasons that I have him here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and I actually thought this was an okay week for this person, but I feel like they're still going to be propped up as a big character, only to be taken out. And here we have Nathan. And again, I thought this was an okay week for Nathan. He takes credit for the shy move at the last tribal. He takes the credit for that, and even gets some good content as the merge is happening, where he talks about how the merge is where his game plan comes to life, and that the first tribal after the merge sets the tone for the rest of the game. He talks about how the merge is a turning point, and again, mostly good content here. But again, I feel like he's another one that's just going to be like a big character, someone that's going to be propped up as a big threat. And while he is in a better position right now compared to Christopher, I feel like the game will eventually turn on Nathan to where he'll probably not win. So it's for that reason that I can't have him too much higher than here. Then also, I feel like the other people's edits are a bit more interesting to talk about. So it's for all those reasons that he's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone pretty similar to Nathan, and that they also got a good edit this week, but I still feel like they're not being set up to win in general. But here we have Pegleg. And I feel like Pegleg's another one that got an interesting edit this week. He talks about how a lot has changed since the swap, and that the game's a lot more dynamic now. He talks about how Ashley and Christopher think they're running the game, but in reality they're not. And sure enough, the game does flip on them by the end of it. And he does get a decent amount of credit for this flip against Ashley and Christopher, where he does get a lot of confessionals talking about how it'll be good to blindside one of them and how it'll avenge both him and Lee, which is all pretty good. And sure enough, one of them does get taken out by the end of it. Now, from a pure game standpoint, him losing Lee is not particularly great. He was blindsided that vote, which is another case of Pegleg not voting correctly here, which is a knock from him from a game standpoint. But I feel like the edit is kind of propping him up to a degree, which is a big reason why he's as high as he is. But again, I feel like by the end of it, he'll probably be taken out as a big threat, or be someone that will just lose at the end due to him not voting correctly in a lot of cases. So again, I don't think he'll actually win still, but he is still someone that I think has been propped up to a solid degree, which is why he is here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this person has actually jumped up a good amount from last week, and I did wonder if this was too high, but I did decide to stick to my guns here. But number 4, we do have Lawrence. And I actually thought this was an okay week for Lawrence as well, where he does get some interesting content, like right as the merge is happening, talking about how he's happy that the merge is here, as there's more cannon fodder now. He also gets this really random confessional at the beginning of episode 10, talking about how it's crazy that he's survived this long, which I found pretty interesting. But most of all, he gets to talk about his game plan and how when other people panic, he'll just sit back and let them play, which I thought was pretty interesting content there. And obviously, while he doesn't get too much content beyond that, I think it could be excused by this very confessional, how he'll just sit back and let these big power players take each other out, and then he'll just crawl back in towards the end and he'll make his move then. So I think that's a pretty interesting way to go about it. And I feel like in general, like Lawrence has been on the upswing for me to a degree. The reason that I put him above Pegleg is that he did vote correctly at the lead vote, which I think is a minor pro from a game standpoint. And again, from the edit standpoint, I think there is still a shot that he could surprise some people towards the end. So I think it's for all those reasons that I have him at least this high on the list, but it's not quite enough to crack the top tier for me, which is why he is here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and kind of similar to Lawrence, this person has also been on the upswing in my eyes, but we actually have Matthew here. And I actually thought this was another interesting episode for Matthew here, where he talks about his tribal dynamics, where admittedly his merge episode is kind of quiet, but he is all over episode 10, where he talks about how he's essentially in the middle, where he obviously has his alliance with Ashley and Christopher, but he also has his original group with Tanuk and Nathan. So he did get to articulate his strategy to a degree here, which I found pretty good. Admittedly, I could see this as a bit of an overreaction in my eyes, but I still find this to be a mostly good episode for Nathan from an edit standpoint. And again, from a game standpoint, I feel like he's in a very solid spot. So I feel like it's for all those reasons that I have him at least this high on the list. But again, I feel like the top contenders are still pretty clear in my eyes, which is why he is here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and obviously these two have been top contenders for a lot of the season, and that hasn't really changed here. But number 2, I did decide to go with Doug. And obviously Doug is someone who continues to have a pretty interesting edit here, where obviously right at the bat he gets to explain his vote to take out Shai, the last tribal, how he and Nathan are at the top of the tribe now. Going forward, he talks about how this merged tribal will draw lines in the sand. And while he doesn't vote correctly there, where he does vote for Ashley, this is obviously the tribal where Lee makes it clear that Ashley is this bigger player, and that moving forward, he talks about how Ashley and Christopher are playing hard and that they don't know what they're doing, which I find pretty funny there. He obviously talks about how Ashley and Christopher are expecting him to vote with them. So this could show his cards, but in the end, he does vote correctly. He does vote to take out Ashley, which is pretty interesting there. Admittedly, I feel like this edit wasn't as strong compared to the number 1 person, but he has still shown himself to be a pretty big player across the season, and definitely someone who is a major character and someone that we're supposed to be invested in here, which is a big reason why I still have him this high. But I feel like the number 1 person is being more clearly set up to eventually win, which is why he is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor UK right now is Tanuk. And I feel like this was a very strong batch of episodes for Tanuk here, where right at the bat, she lays out the tri dynamics, talking about how at the merge she has Leilani, Matthew, and Nathan, and that the Lananas have the numbers and that they're the underdogs here. She really gets to narrate a lot of the scramble leading up into this tribal, talking about how people are being shifty and that they have to scramble now that they can't just rely on winning challenges, and that this won't be a testosterone battle, which leads directly into her voting out Lee. And even the following episode is pretty good as well, where she talks a lot about the Ashley and Christopher stuff. She has that conversation with Ashley over what Lee said about Ashley wanting to target her at some point, which leads into her claiming that Ashley was previously the one in control, but now she's the one in control, which I find pretty good there. And obviously she's the one to articulate that they want to plan to split the vote on Ashley and Christopher, which is obviously pretty good. Now, obviously, there's a bit of a knock here from a game standpoint, in that she did technically want Ashley to stay over Christopher, as she seemed to be a bit closer to Ashley than to Christopher, but still she is still part of the majority plan here to take out Ashley here after Christopher plays his idol. So again, I still feel like this was still a good week for her. She's obviously in a much better spot now, where before, like, she articulated that the Caltons were down the numbers, but now that 2 original Caltons have gone, her tribe is now in a much better spot. Her core is in a much better spot now than they were coming into the week. And at the end of the day, I still feel like she has a stronger edit compared to Doug. And I feel like this episode overall was better for Tanuk than it was for Doug, which is why I have her here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really help out the channel. I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can stay tuned for that. I am still covering Survivor 45 as well as The Amazing Race 35, so you can expect weekly power rankings of those shows. I'm on Patreon, so you can consider supporting the channel by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.